I work in a pharma company, work in an R&D organization. Computational life science existed in this organization already for 15, 20 years. So in fact, for many pharma R&D, data science is something new. Although, in industry broadly, data science is now already, 10 years old. So essentially the field, or let's say in R&D and pharma and life sciences, they have a strong history in computational discipline. Data science is quite new, I would say. So it's maybe 5 years or so that we see data science departments being set up within R&D organizations. Data science in industry generally is more on the operational nature.
Welcome to Data Science Dialogues, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of data science and analytics, going beyond the lines of code to explore the crucial business aspects that drive innovation and decision making. I'm your host, ST, and each episode we will be joined by industry experts, thought leaders, and pioneers in the field of data science and analytics.
Today we have Dr. Ashar Ahmad. He is an experienced AI/ML scientific leader, currently serving as the Data Science and Advanced Analytics Associate Director. With over 10 years of experience, he leads the flagship program, Data-Driven Human Disease Understanding, focusing on AI/ML projects in drug discovery and development. His prior role at UCB involved projects in subpopulation identification and causal ML on real-world data. Dr. Ahmad holds a PhD in computational life science from the University of Bonn. He actively engages in the scientific community, volunteers as a peer reviewer, and has certifications in neuroscience. He shares his expertise through blog articles on topics like causal inference and machine intelligence in drug discovery.
Cool. We are on. Ashar, thanks for making the time. Welcome to the pod.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So,
Let me start with the first question. From chemical engineering background from IIT Bombay to a PhD, what made you decide on that kind of a pivot, changing your field from chemical engineering? Right now you are in computational life sciences. You did PhD in computational life. What motivated you to pivot your field from chemical engineering? And how was the journey from chemical engineering PhD in computational life?
So you're right. I think I did make a big pivot. But actually, it was not such a big pivot, and I'll explain why it was not. So within chemical engineering, I was mostly interested in modeling and simulation. So basically, in chemical engineering, you have these large, the whole field of chemical engineering is about how to manage these large chemical plants that are manufacturing chemicals, materials, or all kinds of stuff. So the whole field is designed. How do you run these operations? How do you manage, to be in control of all the things that are happening within the plants? And within that discipline, there is this computational aspect. So a lot of these things now are run on this computational model. So when I was in my bachelor's, I was always interested in more in the simulation and the modeling part of these chemical reactors. And I did a couple of projects when I was at IIT Bombay around this kind of, how do you model complex systems like a chemical reactor, or it could be other systems, it could be polymers, it could be other kinds of systems. So I was always interested in the computational aspect of it, so how can we actually model these things on a computer and then simulate them? Because at the end of the day, this simulation is going to be useful to a plant operator or to anybody who's then having a say in how this whole operation is run. So having that background, I wanted to do something more mathematical after my bachelor's. So engineering is focused very much on the applications. So of course you need to understand what are, let's say, the main operating principles of these reactors, or even larger complex systems. But I wanted to somehow have a more mathematical focus in my master's. So I did a master's in modeling and simulation of complex systems, and basically it involves learning about physics and learning about mathematics and basically statistics, and that was my master's. And then I think as a next step, I was thinking, okay, I have a chemical engineering background. I also did some courses in biology while I was at IIT Bombay, although I must say it was not a major, or it wasn't a major part of my degree. So I was trying to see how I can combine what I had learned in my engineering. I have now a couple of years of as a master's student. I worked also on modeling and simulation generally, not just in chemical engineering, but generally. actually. And then I decided, of course, there are many things, you apply for PhDs and then you hope that one of these places accepts you. So it's not always, your future is not always fully in your control. I basically applied for a couple, like 3 or 4 positions in Europe. One of them was in the life sciences area, where I got selected in Bonn. And so this is how I've actually moved from chemical engineering, modeling simulation, and finally computational life science. But essentially, I would say the underlying, let's say, skill sets hasn't drastically changed. So that's probably what connects all those 3 things together.
Great, great. That's good to know. So just a follow-up thing there. As you are right now, leading a computational life, you are in a computational life sciences space. When we are talking about computational life, how is it different from, let's say, someone like me who is working in a data science space? Because I'm very sure that the mathematical skills or the statistical skills are pretty much the same. What are the different challenges that you face, or what are the different areas that you cater to in computational life sciences as compared to?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is a very interesting question. In fact, I work in a pharma company, work in an R&D organization. Computational life science existed in this organization already for 15, 20 years. So in fact, for many pharma R&D, data science is something new. Although, in industry broadly, data science is now already 10 years old. So essentially the field, or let's say in R&D and pharma and life sciences, they have a strong, I would say, history in computational discipline. And there are multiple computational disciplines. That includes things like, if you're working with drug discovery space, there is something called computational chemistry. If you work with biomolecules or biology, there's something called computational biology. So these are like traditional disciplines that already exist in life science organizations, pharmaceutical organizations, mostly in the R&D department, because this is more science and discovery. Data science is quite new, I would say. So it's maybe 5 years or so that we see data science departments being set up within R&D organizations. So I would say that so the data science, of course, and this is something I don't have firsthand knowledge, but from what I hear from my friends and peers in industry, that data science in industry generally is more on the operational nature. So you have in a tech company, you have user content data coming in, you have all kinds of data that is captured by the tech platform. This is the base of the data that that you're working with and of course the techniques are probably very similar that we use in R&D, or somebody in the operational or the business side, the commercial side of things they use. So the toolboxes are quite similar. However, I have to say that I would say pharma data science, pharma R&D data science is quite specific and special because of it is always trying to always work together with other computational life science disciplines, and you have a very strong culture of computational chemistry, computational biology, biostatistics. Again, I think this is also very interesting. We work together with biostatistics or statistics people, and I think in generally outside this R&D space, I would say a data scientist generally has to have statistical skills as well. So there is a lot expected, I would say, outside pharma R&D for that one data scientist or that data science team to have all those skills, from software engineering, project management, to statistics, to all these others, domain expertise. But I think in R&D, it's a bit, it's also very specialized. So you do have statisticians, or like big teams of statisticians. You do have computational chemistry, biology teams that are separate. So I guess, yes, there are, of course, this is a point we could talk about more, but I would say it is very specific, so working in life science, specifically within life science, the R&D department is quite specific for data scientists.
Ashar, so recently we had Farnoosh. She is a biostatistician herself. We invited her over our pod. So one of the very important points that she mentioned was in this particular domain, obtaining data regarding the problem that you are trying to solve is a very big challenge in itself. Okay. Yeah. So how do you approach similar problems?
So it, of course, within so getting data, we have to understand the R&D department covers the many different parts of discovering a medicine. So you start with, let's say, lab work, and then basically you do maybe experiments on animals, and then you move to human testing. So this is clinical trials. And mostly biostatistics works within the human clinical trial area. So running a clinical trial, it costs you anywhere between 5 million to 200 million euros, or dollars. So it's, of course, you have to see every data point, and this data is incredibly private. It's data from patients who are suffering from a certain disease. So there is, of course, a cost component to it. These trials, let's say if we talk about data from human subjects, these trials run for anywhere between 12 weeks to 2 years. So again, the whole trial might take 3 years to finish. So again, there's a lot of the timelines are quite large on that, and it's a huge cost investment. There is also there are a lot of strong, I would say, factors that limit sharing this kind of data, patient level data. So our companies, they do not generally share this kind of patient level data. So this is also something to keep in mind. So the data is indeed, so you don't have big data, I would say, generally, unless you are in a very big pharmaceutical company that has decades of clinical trials with maybe thousands of clinical trials, or tens of thousands of clinical trials. So then you might get into that big data regime, but generally the data is very, it's not easy to gain your hands on, and also it's very expensive. Also has these privacy concerns, it's quite different from let's say a tech company that has user data. That's pretty obvious, right? And this is just about in the clinics, but you do get a bit more data when you're early on in the drug discovery. So when you're, let's say, working in the lab, so doing experiments in the lab are not as expensive as doing a clinical trial. So you of course there is cost to it, maybe thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, but still there the data is still much more in quantity. So, and the data is not on patient level, but let's say on a chemical level or on a certain biological target level. So it's again quite spread out in terms of how data is available and used by data science teams.
Talking about data science again, you have a special interest, I believe, in causal inference making, and you also have posted on your LinkedIn regarding the blog series that you started for the causal inference and how data science plays where data science comes in this particular thing. Mm-hmm. So can you please elaborate a little more on why you use this particular topic for your blog series?
Sure. So again, causal inference, I think, is something that always comes up. So the reason why causal inference is so interesting for data scientists is because, as I told you, data scientists work with other computational life science disciplines, right? So you have biostatistician. You just gave an example of biostatistician, or even working with computational chemists. Interestingly, almost all of these computational life science disciplines, they know how to plan and design experiments that can basically get you to a hypothesis, right? Data scientists, I feel, and I will say this is also true for myself, the focus was never, or is not really much on, how the data was obtained, what was the experimental design that went into getting that. And so we of course, I think a lot of focus is on prediction, and that's totally fine. But I feel like, one has to think about the data generation process, what went behind that data that was produced. And it was because of a concerted experiment that was done, because people wanted to have a specific experimental design. Now, so this is why I think having an understanding of the data generation process is important. And data is generated in R&D with experiment. And so the experimental design becomes really important. If we want to do something with the data, we need to understand what are the, let's say, the assumptions when we're talking about data that we are working with. And causal inference, I think, really is a very interesting field, because originally causal inference is a statistical discipline, although you could say that machine learning also derives itself from statistics. But causal inference, and a lot of work that causal inference communities have done, is traditionally in statistics, econometrics, and possibly other fields, but not directly so much in machine learning. So nowadays, you of course have a lot of groups working on causal inference, but this hasn't been traditionally the case. There are certain, there have been certain, I would say, within machine learning or the data science community, there have been people working on Bayesian networks, for example. And Bayesian networks are, you would say, definitely part of the data science toolbox, and that is definitely an area of causal inference. However, what I talk about in my blog series, in fact, is not based on the Bayesian network and causal graph theory, but and this is something to do with the use case I basically had in mind. So the use case of causal inference that I'm actually putting forward also in my company is the idea of how do we work with observational data sets. Observational data sets are those data sets that are not generated using clinical trials. So these are not randomized data sets, but they are more observational in the sense that there's no protocol that randomizes subjects. So if you think about A/B testing, this is a very good example of how you make an effort to randomize some of your users into certain groups, and this is also very similar to what happens in a drug setting, where you basically have this randomization which gives some of the patients the drug and some of them the not the drug. So it's a placebo treatment, and then what you have is a very nice group where one of them is that getting the drug, the other one is not, and so you can derive causal estimates from that. But what we see is that, as you mentioned also before, the point around data availability, you don't have a lot of patient populations in your clinical trials. What you do have, of course, is a lot of patients in the real world, like all of us, taking certain drugs, and basically this is also tracked in some way. And the idea was, can we draw certain causal inference using this kind of patient population? So not something in your controlled controlled randomized control setting, but more in the real world. I think this is why I am interested in this area, and also it is behind a lot of these use cases that we're driving in our company.
Got it.
Okay. So again, just adding to the conversation that we are having. So I think in data science world, right, where we talk about many business problems, there are very less use cases where we talk about causal. Very, very less use. We are majorly talking about more sort of an association limits. This goes high, this also. We cannot say this goes high because of. So I think in medical field, it's very, very important to understand the causal inference as well, because here we are talking about many diseases and we want to understand what is going to be the impact. So I think this is where the causal inference potentials, you can say we can unleash in field with respect to computational life sciences, where we're talking about different drugs, their impact. So yeah, I think that is one of the space where causal inferences will see a huge potential right now and moving forward as well.
Absolutely, and I can give you an example, which is an example that I often give to my management when they ask me why should we care about causal inference. And it's a very interesting and simple example that you can read it in books and also on Wikipedia. This idea of Simpson's paradox. So what happens is that in the real world, if let's say you're a patient suffering from a certain disease, the doctor can of course look at your symptoms and prescribe you a certain drug. Now, interestingly, if you have a more severe form of the disease, right, you basically get prescribed a more like a treatment which is more severe, in the sense it is for the more severe kind of diseases. Now, when you want to assess whether that drug really worked or not, you will see that the patients who took the drug were in a very serious condition. So when you compare at the end, okay, now you compare after 2 years, okay, what is, let's say, the effect of the drug? Your active, let's say, comparator is basically those patients who are very severely affected by the disease. So essentially, it's kind of you're comparing a more difficult group with, let's say, people who did not take the drug, because maybe people who did not take the drug were not so well, highly progressed in their disease. So it's like, now if you want to compare whether that drug did indeed have an effect, you need to account for the fact that when the patients took the drug, they themselves were quite different from patients who did not take the drug, because the doctor is not prescribing things randomly. He's based on your disease condition, he's prescribing things. So I think this is why I think the causality is really important. Like you could immediately make the case that and this is quite well known. This is just you talk to an epidemiologist, he will say this is like the first thing you read or you go through when you do a first class in epidemiology. Like, observation is very difficult to draw causal inference from. So you need a bit of statistics or whatever, but you need to account for this. There's this thing called confounding, which is there, and that's very easy. You can draw conclusions. Also, reverse causation. Does the drug does taking the drug actually cause your symptoms to get better, or is it something else? Or maybe is that so there's reverse causation is also very interesting, and you need to distinguish those things. from data, which is even more tricky. So that's why I think causal inference, is very, very relevant for our field. Yeah.
Correct. And like COVID vaccines is a classic example. We have COVID vaccines, different people are taking it, they have different sort of immunities, and then they have different, the kind of strength they are building against the virus is very much different. Varies with respect to the age groups, it varies with respect to the demographics you are in. So I think COVID vaccines is a very good example why causal relationship is very, very important to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to see that drug companies, they basically sell their drugs based on how effective it is in the real world. So, the drug companies have to establish that their drugs work in the real world, and that, they cannot make the claim that, always just correlation. They basically get paid, their drug prices get paid on how well their drug is doing causally, not just like correlating to something else. I think this is also why it's very useful here in this field.
Great, great. So, just moving ahead and just taking our discussion forward. So we have seen, many advances in medical, we can say AI or data science or computational mindset. How do you think that this field is going to evolve? So I was looking at one of the research, I was looking at one of the other podcasts in which scientists were saying that by 2050, there could be medicines which, are kind of not leaving any sort of residue. So you won't have any side effect in it. Today, we can see that mostly all of the medicine, maybe they have very little side effect, come up with the side. But the idea is to transform the medicine journey in such a way that, let's say by 2050, if I'm taking a medicine don't have any side effect. Do you think this has a possibility, or how close we are to achieve that kind of a field in terms of medical industry?
So this is again a very interesting subject, and I don't think that data science alone is enough for us going in that direction. Of course, that is something that we all would like. The reason why people have adverse events or drug reactions which are not supposed to happen is because these chemicals, basically they're also binding to places or to targets that they're not supposed to bind. So it's what we in pharmacology what are called off targets. So basically you have, when you develop a drug, you say this is going to be the target that it's going to bind to, and this is the foundation of drug discovery and pharmacology. But what happens is that this drug then also binds to other things in your body, and this is causing these adverse events and side effects. And this is always the case, that the more you make the drug potent, meaning the more you make the drug more effective on your real target, it might even also then start to show effects on other targets. And the higher you dose a specific drug, meaning that if you have a higher concentration of that drug, the more side effects you see. So again, always in the clinical trials, you always have this benefit to risk assessment. So it's always risk. This is I think currently whether the risk is small, whether you have whether if so, the risk can also be very different, and I think these risks are also tolerated differently. So I think unfortunately in oncology, where you really need these kinds of drugs, these drugs are incredibly toxic to the body. So you basically have a lot of side effects. While if you're developing an analgesic, a painkiller, you cannot get away with a very strong side effect. So if you're having a headache and you take paracetamol or ibuprofen, then you're not, if you have a very strong reaction against that, then that drug will not work. This is so the risk and the adverse event that you have, of course, have to be seen in respect to the benefits that this drug has, and especially the condition of the patients. I think so. What I see is that, of course, that we might make drugs which are cleaner in the sense that they have a more higher benefit and lesser of a risk. But I think there's so much going on, that I don't know if data science can actually help in that. What data science can definitely help in the next 5-10 years, and what has actually been going on, is the idea of personalizing the drugs for you. So basically, when you have a headache, or when you have, let's say, a chronic pain condition, the doctors can prescribe you certain medications, but with different doses. So they don't exactly know what dose to give you, because they want to try out with a lower dose and then go higher dose. And I think right now what is very likely is that you will, based on all the data that is out there, let's say on your patient level data, you can be prescribed a very personalized dose, which could be right in the first. So you don't need to have this kind of trial and error by the doctor, but it could be precise at the very beginning. So this is a simple example of personalization in terms of the medicine. At least in the area that I am in, personalized medicine in general is is a big topic. So, how do we actually create not only just this dose which is appropriate, but generally how do we create drugs which are working for specific patient population? Because, as I said, when you evaluate a drug, you're basically having a lot of patients who are not really responding to the drug, but overall your drug does show a benefit. But the question is, okay, well, that is true, and it's important to show that effect. But in the real world, you will have a lot of patient populations that will not respond to that drug. And how can data science really help in developing these drugs? So in the R&D, first of all, and then also when the drugs are in the real world and in the market, can we actually make personal predictions? So let's say you have certain genetics, you have certain of your blood markers. Does that mean that you are maybe more, you will respond better to this and this treatment? So this is the idea of personalization. It begins from drug discovery, development, right up until in the real world when you're actually prescribed the drugs. So that I think is something that is quite, I would say, it is not that far in the future that we will have, of course, some level of personalization to the drugs.
Yeah, so Ashar, when we talk about data science and AI, diving into healthcare, there are multiple ethical considerations also comes up when you do data science in healthcare. So just to refer, I read an article where, Google's AI, okay, which is again a big black box for us that how it's doing it, that Google's AI can, see through see through your eyes, particularly can. So it particularly could, predict the gender of an individual just by looking at the image of an eye of that particular individual. So when we talk about such ethical considerations, how you guys make decisions even while, let's say, collecting a data or building a model or whatever.
So this is, I think, at the core of what data science, especially on patient level data, is. Right. I think this is something that you always have to bear in mind, that this data is not just it's not just a data point, but it's actually a human being, and it's really, you have to be very careful. So this is also why I think when we started, or this is also true for my previous role, whenever you have these initiatives in companies where we are working with patient level data, and you're working with AI tools on those patient level data, you need strong, I would say, framework of responsible AI. You need to understand, if you're making decisions based on that data, are you actually, how can you make sure that, let's say, you're not being, let's say, denying some patients let's say, the treatment. So if you say that we want personalization, then the big question is, okay, well, that means that some patients will not get a certain drug and others will get it. So how can we be sure that these kind of recommendations that we do make are really, we have good science and good data science backing these things? And the good data science, of course, has to be responsible, open, and it has to be, you have to use all the things that you have in your data science toolbox to make sure that the models you develop, first of all, you understand the models. Of course, it's we always do a kind of explainable AI on our modeling, but also not just that, but you have to understand when you're making decisions, are you somehow placing some individuals in a disadvantageous position, which shouldn't really happen. So I think this is front and center of the work we do, and it's not something that's like an afterthought of the work we do. So it's really, and so I think this is data science, especially on patient level data, has to have these kinds of frameworks, responsible AI, explainable AI. So these things have to be built in from the very beginning. And I think this is what we've also done. I mean, at least in my roles, I've made sure that do those things.
Yeah, so the dangers of algorithms that work well, in preliminary studies, but behave differently on real patient data is, not anymore hypothetical in nature so far.
Yeah.
So Ashar, one more thing is just follow up on this. That could you share a compelling example of how computational approaches now have led to new insights or breakthroughs in understanding biological process or diseases? If I drill it down, let's say rare diseases will be a good example for this.
Yeah. I think so. There have been many things that have come together. Actually, it's not just data science that has, in fact, led to this. We have to see that the human genome was sequenced 20 years back. So we before we knew the human genome, rare diseases were very difficult to diagnose, but also there was no real understanding of how rare diseases actually came about. And I think one of, I would say, promises of genetics data was that if you could only look into the genome of the patient, you will probably find the cause of especially rare disease. And rare disease is very specific because unfortunately rare diseases, generally speaking, are a result of a mutation in a very small region of your genome. So it's either a specific locus or maybe a couple of loci. So it's very specific, and you have a specific change. It could also be a larger chromosome level kind of change, but essentially most of the rare diseases tend to be genetic in nature. And I think that so again, the whole genome was sequenced, and you get a lot of these. So if you get your genome sequenced, which now is very easy, you could of course understand where could be, let's say, the areas which are risky. So basically you could get some kind of risk assessment done on patients who could be suffering from rare disease. So if this is true that indeed in rare diseases you do have a strong genetic component, which is then often now used in day to day. So basically, whenever there is a suspicion that a patient might suffer from a rare disease, the geneticist or the physician basically gets their genome sequenced, and what data science then does is it tries to make sense out of these genetic data. Human genetic data is of course a very, very different kind of data set. It's very peculiar. It's something you need to be trained in. So again, coming back to our original conversation, there is a discipline that actually has done that. Computational genetics is that discipline which has historically worked with genetics data. But there are some interesting use cases of data science which were not traditionally part of the, let's say, computational genetics toolbox. One of them is the idea of risk score, polygenic risk score. Polygenic risk score, just to give you just an understanding what that is, it's basically a kind of a combination of your different risk loci that are part of your genome, and you basically come up with a score, a one score per patient of how likely is it that patient would have a certain disease. It's not maybe that relevant in rare disease conditions where you really have a very clear understanding that there is just one or two or three areas in your genome that are interesting. But in let's say complex diseases, there is of course not just one area of your genome but multiple areas. And we as data scientists, we love this fact that we have a multivariate kind of effect, not just from one or two or three, but a multivariate effect. And we have all these toolbox that basically we can use to capture these multivariate effects. In genetics, we always and also in general, I think in medical field, simpler models are preferred over complex models. So mostly in polygenic risk score, the example that I'm giving you are linear models. They're not complex models. But again, I think it's not about the modeling itself, but it's all about also how data science actually can benefit traditional computational science disciplines like computational genetics. I think there is of course a lot of other use cases, but yeah, I mean there is definitely room for data science to add value there.
Right. And just to add upon the conversation, as you said that these are simple and the kind of visibility they enable is something that very, very critical. Let's say a pharma company or for any of the person who are in research field, because the kind of visibility that they are enabling is very, very important, because we can see how certain things are changing when we are feeding different reports. It can also help us in understanding how the patients groups are, can say, reacting to a particular sort of medicine, or those variables, their interpretation all the way.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
You said one very important, talked about responsible AI, and this is one quote that always goes in my head, right? It's a very popular quote by Elon Musk. Says, if you cannot beat them, join them.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a quote that he gave once he founded Neuralink. Pretty sure that you'll be aware of Neuralink, where he's saying that we can implant smart AI chips into our brain, and that will solve majority of problems. And the idea is to integrate that chip with our consciousness, and it can solve the problems. Like if a person there is a person with full disability, person can walk, person can do everything. Your mind can be get connected to the internet. It's a very scary and very fascinating, right? All of them. What think of these ideas that we are actually researchers have made on these ideas. Right? We are moving towards how we can integrate those chips in our mind. Like, what's your thinking?
I so again, it's so the only thing that working in R&D is that you're always afraid to talk about disciplines that you don't know so well about. So this is belonging to the neuroscience discipline. I would say that I don't know that much of that, but here's an interesting anecdote. So I've been very interested in neuroscience in general. So what you can do with your brain activity and basically how your brain is like a processing center. So essentially, it's also an interesting, maybe this is going in a different direction, but computational life science and computational disciplines, in fact, the philosophy is that the brain is also a kind of a computational center, and so there is in fact a whole philosophy of how the brain computes things in your head, and how essentially some even diseases can be a result of your brain not computing things in the way it should. So chronic pain, for example, and this is again maybe related to the Neuralink example, chronic pain is interesting because some forms of chronic pain result because your brain in fact makes up chronic pain itself. So essentially there's no harm in your body, or the harm that was done on your body has been healed, but still the brain, so it's basically the pain is generated and perceived in your brain, so the pain is perceived in your brain, and even though there might not be any real physical damage to your body, the processing center of your brain still creates that sensation that there's something wrong with your body. And so computational neuroscience is a fascinating topic, and I think it's directly relevant to diseases. And so again, I don't know much about Neuralink's product, but what I can definitely say that it has also made studying neuroscience fashionable, because there are companies now using this in a product, which is maybe was not the case maybe 3-4 years back, and I think they have also recently entered into clinical trials. I mean, these things, I don't know the company so well, so of course Elon Musk is also a very controversial figure in many ways. He does things which I mean, I don't want to criticize, but I think there are some things you could of course take issue with, but Neuralink is an interesting company. I would leave it at that.
Got it. So Ashar, talking about rare diseases, the genetics and the genetic data that we obtain, and then came to my notice that medicines are also developed, in order to cure these rare diseases which occur due to genetics. And just to give an example, I had a classmate during my bachelor's who had been losing his vision, and when we went to the doctor identified that this is a genetic problem, and he will keep on losing the vision over his age, right? So when we contacted a few companies who have been developing medicines in order to cure these diseases, it came out to be those treatments were like 1.5 crore of cost, okay, in terms of Indian rupees. So do you think with advancement in AI, the medical industry, which is very costly, will become somewhat affordable in the future?
I certainly hope so. I certainly hope so. And I fully understand the concerns around cost. I mean, this is something that I know this subject is also heavily debated, especially in the rare diseases. You do have drugs which are available, which are extremely expensive. In fact, the most expensive drugs are in this area, in the rare disease area, where it is really heartbreaking. I think this is a very complex matter. I don't know how much data science, of course, can help, but what I can definitely say is that when the drug companies negotiate the price of the drug, and I don't know how it is in India, but I know how it is in Europe and the US, because they have similar systems. When they negotiate the price, they need to give these authorities some evidence on how this drug has worked or it could work in the future. And I think maybe data science can, of course, help in getting that evidence out there. So in that way, in that sense, I think that it could be make drugs cheaper. There's another angle to it, which is around the R&D. So a lot of these drugs are also more expensive because at least this is the case in Europe, where drug companies spend 1 billion or 1.5 billion US dollars just to get one particular drug through their pipeline, to the patient. So if data science can actually make things more efficient, so I told you about computational life sciences, but can it really actually transform these different disciplines as such that the overall cost of developing this is not 1 billion, but even if it's even if we save maybe 100 million, I mean, that is going to of course reflect on what these companies would charge for the drugs, because now the fact is that they are expensive because they want to recover their cost. And of course, you cannot blame them. At least in Europe, this is the case. Europe and US, this is the case, that they want to recover their costs. And I mean, this is so. I think the cost is, and again, it's a very complex issue in the US. This is specifically also very focused on the country. So in the US, it's very also has a lot of I would say other elements to it than just drug companies negotiating prices. I mean, Europe is also very complex, but in general, yes, I think there is definitely. I hope that. I mean, really, I don't know. I mean, this probably is way beyond my pay grade, but I hope that there is a positive impact.
Correct. Just to add upon this, right? I was involved in one of the pharma companies we were working with. So the idea is how data science can help them is they want to build an expert system. Think for very, you can say, common problem. For example, fever, cough. So the idea is that let's say you take assumption, 500, let's say dollars if they're talking about if they are talking about India, let's say 1100 for a full year. Then you just give them the SIP and then you get your medicine. These are the list of medicines. The thing is, it's very in the initial stages. I think in most of the pharma companies, what are they saying is that for very common sorts of problems that people face in day-to-day life, pain in their teeth, and then they need a medicine in emergency. What medicine take? They're having fever, the stomach is not well. These are the kind of initiative that data science is helping them, right? Because there's a lot of data crunching exercises. There are a lot of, what medicines can we give, because we need to make sure that the person health is not compromising after taking that medicine. But the expert systems is one of the field I think that can help many folks out there, in their day-to-day life, where they can, just not go to the doctor and use, can leverage AI to get, okay, this is the recommended medicine. For example, if you see, there are many use cases for ChatGPT where you tell everything to ChatGPT, you tell the symptoms, and then ChatGPT said, okay, this might be the problem, this might be the medicine of it, please consult the doctor.
Yeah.
So some sort of these kinds of initiative I think can really, really help, the patients or to the masses, because there are many, let's say, countries like in Africa where we saw that drugs is not readily available. There are not many doctors. I think in those sorts of area, data science can really bring that, you can say, health revolution sort of.
Yeah.
People are getting at least some direction based upon one click, or just if we teach them how to leverage this.
Yeah. No, that's
This
really
is one
really
area.
key, and I think this is something that is people will understand. It's very valuable. So recommending certain treatments. Yeah, absolutely. I think I am a bit. The thing is, I'm focused more on, let's say, the early stages of how you actually develop these drugs. So I think when I speak to colleagues, let's say in more patient facing or more close to patient roles, I think these are things that they would also agree that this is very relevant.
Based upon my experience in healthcare, these are the areas where data science can really help. So I'll tell you one very interesting use case. So when I was doing my master's, there was a use case where we were thinking on, can we join two drugs and make it? Because let's say previously a person is suffering from a disease and they need to take, let's say, 4 to 5. Now, can we join 3 to 4 drugs and make it one, so that the person can have to take only one? Because if we can convert 4 to 5 drugs into one medicine, it will reduce the cost as well.
Yeah.
And it will already help, that, let's say, pharma company to expand, because for that particular disease, one pharma company is saying, just take one medicine, others are saying, so these are all the kinds of, the areas where data science majorly helps in, where there's a lot of data crunching, where we talk about descriptions, what doctors are prescribing, what two medicines are going collectively with each other. So these are the kinds of discussion that sometimes I had in past with many of the pharma leaders who are majorly catering to the customer side, to the full side.
Yeah. No, this is really, I have to say, I do not think as much, as I should, because, the problems that I deal with are not, we're not there yet, in the sense that, our drugs are not even past the clinical trial phases. And I fully understand. This is indeed, I think, exactly the use cases you said are really what I think should drive the value that data science has in healthcare.
One of the things that I was looking over the internet, right, that caught my eyes because AI was involved. They were saying that they were able to understand how protein folds into a unique 3D space. Basically, scientists were not able to understand how the protein structure gets unfolds or folds into a space, and it kinds of helps them on how medicine reacts, how medicine attaches to particular protein and impacts the body. So this is one of, you can say, very popular case study or very popular area that got really, really famous in data science and in AI field, how AI is helping them. Are there any other similar use cases, or what do you feel about how AI can help in understanding on how this mind works? Because there's so many mysteries about our brain. We still understand maybe just 2 to 20%. How AI can help us in understanding or giving us these ground.
Yeah, I guess I do understand your question, but I mean, just want to repeat it just so that it's clear. It's about AlphaFold, the use case the AlphaFold brought in, and how could there be or what could be similar kind of use cases in that direction, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I think so. The AlphaFold use case was, of course, highly publicized, and I think it's very relevant. So I told you that drugs, the fundamental the fundamental theory is that the way drugs work is that they go and target a specific target, so a specific protein in your body, and if the drug binds to that specific protein, you basically get an effect. And so that is why I think it's very important to understand these proteins themselves, like how do they actually look like in the body. And proteins and any other molecule, they are in 3D. Our bodies are 3D, so 3D representation is very relevant. And I think I believe that we haven't yet seen that, but I think once we have AlphaFold, we have it now for more than a year and a half. I do feel that there are probably starting some companies have started this building upon that use case. So basically it should help you to get better drugs, basically come up with drugs which now, using AlphaFold's predictions of that protein, you would know exactly where that the molecule would bind to, because that's the fundamental interaction that leads to effects, basically good effects or sometimes harmful effects on your body. So I think AlphaFold is, everything that comes out of DeepMind is, it's high. I think it's it is hyped to some degree, but it's also, they are, I would say, top of their games. This is one of the best or the best AI companies out there. And it is interesting that the CEO has a keen interest in biology. So in fact, he started with reinforcement learning and he started with game playing. But I was watching him talk about what were his motivations. He was talking to Lex Friedman on his podcast, and he said that his idea was not really to develop computer games, but essentially try to understand reinforcement learning as way to copy human intelligence. So of course there is this idea from the CEO as well, and I think many of these companies, although of course they might be you might hear about them in a different context other than life science or other than healthcare, but many of them are in fact hoping that the impact will be in the healthcare at the end, because at the end of the day, I think this is the biggest impact we can make, right? If I can contribute with my data science skill to even one drug in my lifetime, that basically reaches millions of patients, I would say that's it. That's my goal of my life has been achieved. And I think because of the upside is so huge, and unfortunately there's this whole process of developing drugs is very risky. You basically have I would say every one in 100 attempts are successful. This is a very optimistic ratio. Could be even worse, but I'm just saying that the success percentages are very low, and if data science can even increase that percentage by 0.05%, that's good enough, I think. So it's really about these tight, it's such a risky space. You basically have you might hear also scientists saying, I have tried so much, nothing works, we don't understand how this is, can you use data science? And they sometimes do expect magic to come out of data science, which it's like our chemists or biologists have seen the data and they couldn't find out what is, let's say, the insight that they can draw, and then they ask the data scientist, can you draw some insight that we cannot see? And you would say, well, the machines can do a better job in finding patterns, but it's not always easy. We could coming up with that insight that a domain expert who has worked in this area for many years cannot see, because he designed the experiment in the first place. He created the data in the first place, but he now cannot see what's the way forward. And we as data scientists come in and maybe bring in an idea that might work. I think that is something that I have seen that work a few times, but it doesn't happen that often as much as I would hope for. But yeah, this is behind all the use cases we talk about, right? That level of insight. How can you even be shoulder to shoulder with a domain expert? I think one of the things I always tell my other data scientists is we need to be also good chemists. We need to be good. We need to think like biologists. We need to think like clinical medical scientists. I mean, it's we have, of course, data science as our skill, but I think the use cases will come if we are also understanding what our collaborators, how they are thinking. So I think this is really vital.
So, Ashar, so one important thing that we touched, if we look ahead in time, so it's not only about the drugs that we are developing or what data science is coming up with the AI tools, which is making, medical professionals' life easier. But one important fact that comes with it is making, medical solutions available or affordable for everyone. Okay, so that it's accessible to everyone. So similarly, do you have a message for data science aspirants who might be working in this particular field?
Yeah, absolutely. I think healthcare. I would say personally, I have only worked in healthcare, so I mean, again, it's very hard for me to say what you could how I can compare it with something else. But I think in terms of impact, in terms of how you see the things you do in data science affecting real life situations, and health of people. I mean, you make a recommendation or on what treatment that patient should be taking or what drug they should be combining. I mean, and that works. I mean, that is so. I don't see there's anything more. Maybe perhaps there are other, of course, maybe use cases, but I think this is so satisfying. I would say so. Just from I would say, from a point of view of not from seeing the impact it can have on the life of real patients. I think that is something that is I would say hard to have in other fields. Hard to have in other domains. But that's just my biased perspective. I've only worked in life sciences.
Absolutely, Asha. So I ask this question to everyone I almost meet, that let's say for you, chemical engineering, computational engineering, and as well as data science, and these things are, let's say, not in the picture for now. Okay, so what would you have pursued as your next best passion?
Also, no chemical engineering, no computation. Oh wow! I think I would have studied literature, and I would have studied arts, liberal arts. I think sometimes I feel like there's just it's a bit too dry, and unless you see the impact you're having, it could just be like, okay, I'm just turning on my Jupyter notebook, and then and you're looking up your error messages, and just like you don't feel like there's something you're achieving. But if you have that impact, you of course see the value you're doing. But I think if I didn't work in this field, maybe I'll be writing articles for newspapers or doing something, which probably will make me financially pretty insecure. But I guess that's what comes with it.
Yeah, you are already doing that. I am reading your blogs and everything. So yeah, that's already there for you, I guess. So Asha, thanks for making the time. Okay, we will stay connected, and thanks Amber as well to coming up for the pod. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was really nice to talk to you guys, and I'm happy to be connected. I mean, anytime.
Yeah.
It's really nice to talk to you guys, and you also can tell me like what's happening with the data science in India. I mean, I've left India for 10 years. I go back to India every year, but don't know exactly what's the is data science hot as it was maybe 3 years ago. I don't know.
Pretty
So
hot.
it is okay.
It's pretty hot.
Yeah.
To be honest, you can say in India, every startup tried to get their own animal wing because
Yeah.
they have analyzed or they have understood power of it.
Mm.
Tells you, what is your right audience, how your audience is perceiving about the product. Tells you what are the issues in your product. It helps you in scaling. It helps you in expanding. They are, you can say, making their decision based upon the data that they're being after them. They're not going with any sort of expert matter only, because previously I think there were subject matter experts, and if they were saying this is the thing they are going to do, they're totally going upon it. But now data have a huge role in decision making that I can see. So yeah, pretty
That's
hot in
great.
India as well. Yeah.
Great news. Great news. I'm really happy to hear that. Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect.